Ever since I was a little girl, the attic called to me like a living thing. My grandmother's house sat at the end of Maple Lane, its paint weathered gray, and its roof bowed under decades of rain. Inside, the air always smelled faintly of mothballs and old paper. Every summer, I'd clamber up the narrow staircase, its banister worn smooth by generations of curious hands, and push open the attic door. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light, and trunks of polished wood stood in rows like sentinels of the past. My grandmother would remind me with a gentle smile never to open the iron-bound chest in the corner, but that only made me want to do it more. The chest was ancient, its surface etched with curling symbols I couldn't decipher. Even as a child, I sensed it held something more than mere belongings, something alive, waiting. I'd press my ear to its lid and swear I heard a faint hum, as if it remembered voices long silent. My grandmother's warning echoed in my mind, some doors are closed for a reason. But curiosity, a fierce flame, would draw me back within days. When I turned 20, my grandmother passed away, and the house fell into a deafening silence. I inherited her estate, the faded furniture, the overgrown garden, and, most importantly, that attic. The first night I slept under the steep rafters, I awoke to scratching overhead. Heart hammering, I bolted upright in bed, convinced I'd imagined it. When I climbed the stairs, moonlight spilled from the dusty window and illuminated every trunk, except the chest. Its lid was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness peeking out. My breath caught. I could still hear the scratching, now silent as if holding its breath too. I fled the attic and locked the door behind me, but sleep eluded me. By morning, cottage pie on the stove grew cold. I tossed coffee back, my nerves raw. The world outside seemed oblivious. Birds chirping, mail trucks rumbling down the lane, neighbors taking morning walks. But inside that house, something had shifted. I spent the next day in the library, scouring tomes of local history. The house had belonged to my grandmother's family for nearly 2 centuries. Rumors of curses and vanished relatives trickled through town lore but always ended in whispered half-truths. No one spoke openly, as if the story itself might summon whatever lurked in that attic. That night, I returned with a flashlight and trembling hands. The chest waited. Its lid yawned open wider, dark as a well. I knelt and ran my fingers along the iron rim. It was surprisingly warm. Trepidation roiled in my stomach, but I lifted the lid all the way. Inside lay a leather-bound book, no larger than my forearm, its cover cracked and faded. No title, only the same curling symbols carved in silver that matched the chest's exterior. My pulse thundered. I drew it out and held it close, the leather cold and stiff. I settled on the floor against the wall and pried the book open. The pages were yellowed, brittle at the edges, covered in cramped script and strange diagrams. I flipped past pages until I found a line in English, written in flowing cursive. "The truth waits where shadows dance?" Beneath it, a symbol I recognized from the chest's carvings. My grandmother's voice whispered in my mind, "You must not let it claim you." But the words on the page beckoned. I read on, deciphering passages with the help of my phone's translator app. The book told of a family curse. How an ancestor betrayed a stranger who had saved her life, casting the stranger into shadow as punishment. The stranger vowed vengeance against every descendant until the betrayal was undone. As rain lashed the windows, I read until dawn. The instructions described a ritual to free the stranger's spirit, and also to bind it forever, ending the curse. Candlelight, a mirror, the speaking of a name lost to time. My head spun. Was this centuries-old superstition or truth? The air in the attic felt thick, as though the shadows themselves strained at the edges of the light. I realized that if I ignored the book, the curse might claim me, or worse, wander free into the world. Determined, I gathered supplies. Black candles from the hardware store, an antique mirror I found in the hall closet, and a piece of chalk to trace the symbol. At midnight, I ascended to the attic once more. The house was silent. In the circle of candlelight, shadows flickered and leaned toward me as I drew the symbol on the floorboards. My breath caught each time a candle guttered. I placed the mirror on a dusty trunk, its surface reflecting the wavering flames. Uncertain but resolute, I spoke the stranger's name, an impossible sound of hissing consonants and heavy vowels, written phonetically at the back of the book. The moment I finished, the candles flared bright, then plunged into darkness. I stared at the mirror, my heart in my throat. The glass rippled like water, and a figure emerged behind me. Tall and cloaked, face hidden in shadow, I dared not move. The air grew icy. A single sorrowful moan filled the attic, echoing off the rafters. The shadow reached toward the candles, as if drawn to their light. I stifled a scream. Then, thunder cracked overhead, and a wind rushed through the attic, though no window was open. The candles were lit themselves, and the figure shrank back into the mirror's surface. The attic fell silent again, save for my ragged breathing. The book lay closed in the chest behind me, safe for now. In the days that followed, the house felt different. Doors I'd always found locked stood open. At night I sometimes heard soft sobbing drifting from the attic. My friends grew concerned when I appeared at lunch pail and haunted. I lied that I was stressed about work. Yet, a part of me welcomed the presence, proof that the ritual had summoned something real. I began researching the stranger's name and symbols, tracing them through myth and history. Each lead pointed to a medieval village where the ancestor had lived, now long abandoned. Maps and old letters led me to plan a trip to Europe. If I could find the stranger's resting place, perhaps I could lay the spirit to rest. But every trip required money, and time I barely had. Meanwhile, the chest groaned on its own at night, and books shifted on shelves with no breeze. I confided in Marisol, a college friend studying folklore. Over coffee, I showed her the book and described the shadow in the mirror. She grew pale but nodded. "You performed a binding ritual," she said. "It won't hold forever. You have to complete the second part, free the spirit properly." She drew diagrams in my notebook, matching the book's symbols to historical accounts of shadow spirits. "The stranger wasn't evil," she said softly. "They were betrayed. You must honor their memory." That night, I sat by the fire in the parlor, republishing the stranger's story in my mind. A woman forced into exile, her name erased by cruelty and fear. A spirit lingering for centuries, craving justice. I realized the ritual in the attic was only the beginning. My grandmother had protected our family by burying the book in the chest, but she had never completed the ritual. Now the task was mine. I gathered new supplies, a silver locket from the antique shop, a lock of my grandmother's hair preserved in a locket she wore, and the stranger's name carved on a wooden plaque. I returned to the attic at dawn, Wyatt's painting of stormy skies tossed aside, and set up everything in the candlelit circle. As I recited the apology and invocation from the book, tears streamed down my cheeks. The attic grew silent. Even the boards beneath me seemed to hold their breath. In the mirror, the figure shimmered, a flicker of sorrow and hope. When I spoke the final words, "May your shadow find the dawn," the mirror cracked, spiderwebbing outward, and then went black. Silence. Stillness. Then a single ray of sunlight pierced the attic window, touching the chest and illuminating the book's cover in a golden glow. I felt warmth flow through me, and I knew it was over. I swept up the candles, careful not to break the mirror's shards. I locked the chest and placed a final stone atop it. A round pebble I'd chosen at the old brook behind the house, symbol of peace. Weeks later, the house felt alive in a gentle way. The attic no longer whispered, and the chest remained closed, its secret sealed. My grandmother's journals, found tucked behind a loose brick in the fireplace, revealed she had begun the ritual but never finished it when illness overtook her. Now, in completing her work, I honored her memory and freed the shadow that haunted our bloodline. Every summer since, I climb the attic stairs and place a single white rose beside the chest. The sun streams in, dust motes drifting in calm beams, and the air feels light. I know the attic's secrets rest quietly now, its darkness laid to rest. But I also know that some memories, or truths, refuse to stay buried, and if the day ever comes when the chest creaks open again, I will be ready. When I returned home from the attic that morning, I felt as though I carried the weight of centuries on my shoulders, and a spark of purpose in my heart. The broken mirror shard lay wrapped in a cloth on my desk, its jagged edge kissed by candle soot. I tucked it inside the silver locket I'd bought, securing the stranger's shadow within a vessel of memory and light. For days afterward, the house hummed with calm. No scratching at night, no shifts of furniture, no flicker of unseen eyes. I dared to breathe again. Yet beneath that fragile peace, the book's unfinished promise pulsed like a heartbeat. I knew the attic ritual bound and released something, but only the second part, honoring the stranger's life, could seal the curse permanently. My grandmother's journals hinted at her failed attempt, a journey to the old country, a quest interrupted by illness. Now, with the chest locked and the book in my library, I prepared for the next step. I spent a week researching local archives and online databases, piecing together the story of Eleanor de Clermont, a woman born in 1623, accused of witchcraft and betrayed by her closest friend, became an obsession. Records showed she'd vanished from the village of Saint-Rémy-sur-Bois, her property seized and her name erased. Legends whispered that her spirit still roamed the willow-lined canal near the old stone church. If I was to fulfill her final wish, to clear her name and lay her spirit to rest, I needed to go to France. Booking a flight felt surreal. I packed the book, the silver locket, the chalk symbol, and a printout of Eleanor's historic records. On the plane, turbulence tossed me as if warning me of the task ahead. I clutched my seat, mind swirling with fragments of fear and resolve. When the pilot announced our descent into Lyon, I exhaled like a diver breaking the surface of deep water. Saint-Rémy-sur-Bois lay 2 hours south by train. A hamlet of cobbled lanes, slate roofs, and shuttered windows painted in fading pastels. I arrived at dusk, the village cloaked in golden lamplight and a hush that felt sacred. My guidebook named one hotel on the main square, its sign swinging above a narrow doorway. Inside, the proprietor, Madame Duval, greeted me with a knowing smile. "You're here for the de Clermont legend," she said, as though reading my purpose from my face. Over a dinner of hearty stew and crusty bread, she told me how villagers spoke in low tones of the lost daughter of the canal, a ghost wandering by moonlight, seeking justice. At midnight, I slipped out to the canal's edge, silver locket in hand. Willow branches dipped into the water, and the moon's reflection danced on ripples. I whispered Eleanor's name, reciting the apology I'd learned. "I honor your memory. I release your sorrow. May your truth be known." The water stilled, as though listening. A soft breeze carried a whisper in Old French. Words I barely understood, but felt in my bones. I pressed the book's symbol into the earth by a weathered stone bridge and waited until dawn. Morning light revealed a worn gravestone I hadn't noticed before. Eleanor de Clermont, wrongfully accused, 1623 to 1648. The engraving had once been concealed by ivy. Now it stood bare. I traced her name with trembling fingers. The air felt lighter, the willows sighing in relief. I took a photograph, documenting her restored place among the living. Returning to the hotel, I found Madame Duval waiting with tea. She arranged her cup on the table and said, "You have brought peace." Tears sprang to my eyes. No chest rattled in my mind, no ghostly sobs haunted my dreams. I realized then that by traveling to the origin of the curse, I had completed the ritual of remembrance my grandmother began, and I finished. The next 3 days, I walked the village lanes, speaking with residents who remembered the legend as bedtime tales and cautionary gossip. I shared Eleanor's restored history, showing them the gravestone and my photographs. Children gathered by the canal at dusk, searching for the lost lady, no longer with sorrow but with reverence. In the café, I placed copies of the historical records, ensuring that the story of betrayal and redemption would remain part of Saint-Rémy's memory. On my final morning, I packed my bags and folded the book into my coat pocket. At the station, Madame Duval embraced me and pressed a small clay token into my hand, a willow leaf motif she carved herself, symbol of Eleanor's release. "For your grandmother," she whispered. I wept then, imagining my grandmother's pride in the quiet chapel where Eleanor's truth now lay honored. Back home, I placed the clay token beside the chest in my attic. The air felt still, the house breathing like a contented creature. I closed the attic door and slipped the key into my pocket. The chest and its book remained locked away, guardians of a tale completed. In the evenings, I lit a single candle beside the locket and read Eleanor's final journal entry, a delicate poem of forgiveness and hope. I felt her presence not as a chill in the air, but as a warmth against my heart, a companion in the long night. My grandmother's warning, to never let the chest claim me, echoed not as fear, but as respect for stories that shape families. Life resumed its quiet patterns. Morning coffee, library research, weekend walks with friends. Yet, something inside me had shifted. I had faced shadows and brought them into the light. I had honored a woman's memory and freed a spirit bound by betrayal. The chest held its secrets, but its purpose, to teach me about courage, memory, and love, remained clear. One late autumn day, I took the locket from my desk and opened it to reveal the mirror shard and the token's imprint. I slipped it around my neck and stepped into the crisp air, sun slanting through amber leaves. I climbed the attic stairs one last time, not as a seeker, but as a guardian of the past, a bridge between stories old and new. Standing before the chest's iron latch, I whispered Eleanor's name once more, offering thanks across centuries. Then I closed the chest, turned the key, and walked away with a peaceful heart. Though the attic's secrets stayed buried, their lesson lived on, that the darkest truths, when honored with courage and compassion, can bring the light of redemption, and that some memories, when set free, illuminate the path home. In the weeks that followed my return from St. Remy-sur-Bois, the house settled into a calm I had not known since childhood. The attic door remained firmly locked, its key tucked safely in my pocket, a reminder of the journey completed and the promise kept. I found myself drawn to the parlor window in the early morning light, steam curling from my coffee mug, birdsong drifting in on the breeze. And I would think of Eleanor de Clermont, finally at rest beneath the willow-lined canal. Her legacy had become my inheritance, proof that stories, no matter how dark, can be rewritten by courage and compassion. I resumed my job at the local library, shelving books and guiding patrons through dusty archives, but something fundamental had shifted. Where once I had moved through the day weighed by secrets, I now carried an open heart. A soft confidence replaced the restless urgency I had known for so long. Patrons asked about my travels, and in between recommending volumes on folklore and history, I'd share glimpses of Eleanor's story. Their eyes would widen at the notion that a centuries-old curse could be lifted by a woman determined to finish what her grandmother began. At home, I integrated new rituals into my daily life. Each evening, I lit a single white candle on the mantel and placed my grandmother's locket beside it, the silver case now carrying both the mirror shard and the clay token from Madame Duval. I would open the locket and watch the candlelight dance in the tiny fractured mirror, remembering the moment of confrontation in the attic. Then I would whisper a prayer of gratitude, for protection, for completion, and for the knowledge that love endures across time and tragedy. My grandmother's journals, which I discovered secreted behind a loose brick in the fireplace, offered further insight into her own descent into the occult and her decision to hide the book and chest rather than destroy them. I transcribed her notes into a digital archive, preserving her careful handwriting and marginalia. In her spidery script, she chronicled her fear of unleashing forces she could not control, and her final hurried entries described a growing sickness that forced her to abandon the quest she had embarked upon. Reading her words connected me to her more deeply than any photograph could. I understood her reluctance, and I honored her courage. Friends noticed the change in me. Marisol, who had helped me translate the book, called one afternoon with excitement in her voice. "I gave a lecture at the university about Eleanor's case," she said, "and students can't stop talking about you. They want to study surviving chest-bound grimoires." We laughed at the absurd image of dusty tomes passing from hand to hand in a lecture hall. Yet beneath the humor lay validation. The story of the chest and the curse had moved beyond our small circle, touching others who found meaning in the power of remembrance. I also reconnected with the pastor from my childhood, the Reverend Collins, who had once blessed the house after my grandmother's funeral. I invited him for tea, and his kindly eyes brimmed with curiosity as I recounted the rituals and the journey to France. He nodded thoughtfully. "Faith and folklore often overlap," he said. "What you've done is part exorcism, part pilgrimage, part family reconciliation." He offered a prayer of blessing for the attic and the house, and I felt a deep serenity settle over me, as though every prayer my grandmother had offered over those dusty rafters had finally been answered. Life beyond the supernatural continued in its own steady way. I joined a writing group at the community center and drafted an article for a folklore journal, detailing the historical research and the ritual's two stages: binding and release. The process helped me articulate the lessons the curse had taught: that facing shadows rather than ignoring them can bring unexpected healing, that honoring the stories of the past can free us from their weight, and that sometimes the bravest act is simply to let heartbreak guide you toward compassion. One crisp morning, I walked through Maple Lane's overgrown garden, now trimmed and blooming under the care of local volunteers. The roses my grandmother had planted and the lilies I replanted after the attic ordeal flourished in tandem, their petals reflecting both legacy and renewal. I knelt to prune a violet hydrangea and thought of the new bloom I had planted for Eleanor back in France. Across continents and centuries, the message was clear: life springs eternal when tended by remembrance. A year after completing the ritual, I hosted a gathering in the parlor. Neighbors, friends, and a handful of curious students came to hear the full story. No shadows, no secrets. Just the narrative of a woman's curse and another woman's resolve. I displayed the book's symbol drawn in chalk on a framed piece of parchment, the shattered mirror shard encased in glass, and photographs of Eleanor's restored gravestone. As I spoke, I saw wonder and empathy in their eyes. Someone asked how I found the strength to press on when hope seemed lost. I paused, considering. Then I said, hope is a decision, not a gift. I chose to believe that secrets, even terrible ones, deserve daylight, and that every story, no matter how old, can find its ending. In the months that followed, I mentored others who felt haunted by family lore. Questions of inheritance, unspoken tragedies, curses of their own. I guided them in respectful research and compassionate rituals, emphasizing honor over fear. The attic chest, once a symbol of danger, had become a testament to transformation. A locked box that, when opened with intention, held the power to free both the past and the present. One evening, I returned to the attic not to summon spirits but to store away my grandmother's journals and the translations I had made. I flicked on the single bulb and ran my hand along the dusty chest's cool iron lid. No stirrings, no chills, only the steady echo of my own heartbeat. I placed the journals inside, atop the book, and laid the clay token on top. The chest's weight felt gentle, like a silent guardian cradling stories that needed to be told, but not needlessly exposed. I closed the lid and turned the key in the lock. The click resonated with finality. Descending the stairs, I paused at the attic door and placed my hand against the wood. "Thank you," I whispered. To my grandmother, to Eleanor, to the forces that guided me. The house seemed to exhale, a long, contented breath, and I walked away carrying a peace I had never expected. Now, each morning as I served tea in the sunlit kitchen and listened to the laughter of neighborhood children playing, I feel the harmony of a life lived fully in both memory and hope. The chest, sealed and silent, remains a testament to the idea that some doors, once opened and closed with love, can stay shut without fear. And though my story began with whispered warnings and creaking floorboards, it ends in ordinary magic, the knowledge that confronting darkness can illuminate our brightest days, and that the greatest secrets, once honored, can nurture our future. If you ever discover a hidden treasure in your own attic, be it memories, heirlooms, or unanswered questions, remember that curiosity tempered by respect can guide you safely through shadows. Honor those who came before you, listen with compassion, and trust that even the darkest chapters can be rewritten. The chest's final lesson is this: when we dare to hold our history with both reverence and courage, we discover that no secret is too old to set us free.